All right, hello and welcome to the BYU Family History webinar series. I'm Maren, I'm your host for this webinar. In way of announcements, our next webinar will be with Catherine Grant, and that will be on a Wednesday, not a Thursday. So on the 13th, Wednesday at 3 o'clock Mountain Time, we'll be having a webinar with Catherine Grant, and that will be a continuation of her update on the FamilySearch series. So it'll be about collaborating in FamilyTree. So that'll be Wednesday, the 13th of February at 3 o'clock Mountain Time. If you'd like to rewatch previous recordings of these webinars, all of our webinars are recorded and uploaded to YouTube and our website at your convenience. During this webinar, if you have any technical problems, please enter your concerns in the chat box and I can help you out with that. I also respond to emails during the webinar as well. So if you have any comments or concerns, you can email at fhl_webinars@byu.edu. Make sure that your video camera and your microphone is disabled. You're welcome to use the chat box to comment during the webinar. However, questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. And for today's webinar, we have a presentation with James Tanner. It's entitled, "Are You Due for a Genealogy Tune-Up?" And so just to repeat again, this recording will be available on our YouTube page and on our website at the end of the week. And you can access that, I believe Friday morning is when that will be updated. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctorate degree in law at Arizona State University. He served 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He had previously owned a retail computer business and a Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 32 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy's Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary in the Mesa, Arizona FamilySearch Library and is currently serving here at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 34 grandchildren with 1 great-grandchild. And if James is ready, we will turn the time over to him.
Howdy, this is James Tanner. Glad you're here for another webinar from the BYU Family History Library here in Provo, Utah. Beautiful day with lots of snow, and we are ready to talk about, are you due for a genealogical tune-up? Okay, so now you can see the screen, hopefully. We are here in Provo, as I mentioned, and we're going to talk about, are you due for a genealogical tune-up? I'm going to explain that in pretty much detail, so we'll decide what exactly that entails right now. Our examples, my examples today are going to be based on the FamilySearch.org family tree. An important part about that is that the examples apply to all family trees. This isn't, there's nothing unique about, well, there are a lot of unique things about the FamilySearch.org family tree, but in this case, when we talk about the content of the tree and the types of things that we're going to cover in this tune-up idea, is they're going to apply uniformly to all family trees on all the different programs online, of which there are millions and millions and millions, of course. So first of all, we need to know what gets out of tune. What is it that we're talking about that create problems that the family trees don't operate quite at their full capacity? And perhaps the analogy is a little bit stretched. What we're talking about is that the family tree is there for 2 purposes. One is for the purpose of the person who who created the family tree, and that purpose is basically to investigate the person's ancestry. And the other side of that is that because these are online family trees and available for many people to view, depending on the way that the individual who creates the tree desires to have it published, then there's other people are going to see what's the content of that family tree, and perhaps use that to increase their knowledge of their own family. In the case of the FamilySearch FamilyTree, the FamilySearch FamilyTree is a collaborative family tree. Everyone views all of the information. And so there is no such thing as your family tree on FamilySearch. It is everyone's family tree. And so any information you put into the FamilySearch FamilyTree will be viewed by everyone, whether it's right or wrong or complete or incomplete or whatever it is. And additionally, a lot of the information in the FamilySearch FamilyTree, it was inherited from previous submissions, is what we would call that. People who submitted their information to a FamilySearch over the years and to FamilySearch's predecessors going back 100 years or more. And so there's lots of information in there. And what we really need to do is to look at that in terms of how accurate it is and obviously make changes. And the nice thing about the FamilySearch FamilyTree is that you can, if you see something that needs to be corrected, you don't have to ask anybody's permission. You can just go ahead and make the change, and that will be, and then everyone will see that what you've done. Of course, that imposes a little bit of a responsibility, actually quite a bit of responsibility on the people who are editing or adding to or making changes to the family tree, that they do so based upon information that's obtained from evaluated and reasonably acquired historical sources. So we're going to talk more about that as we go along, but basically that's part of the challenge of the problem that we're talking about here. So what are the things that we're going to look at? First of all are names, the way that names are recorded and put into the programs, dates, the way the dates are recorded, places, a very important part of the whole process of doing genealogical research, and sources. What we mean by sources are listing and telling other people where you got the information. You know, if you got this information from Aunt Martha, that's a source. That is your source, and you should tell people that's where you got the information. If you got the information from a U.S. Census record or a probate file or some other documentary evidence, then we need to know that. We need to know where you got it and how we could go find the same information. And memories, general category for everything else: photographs, recordings, stories, everything else that might be included in the category of telling, relating the history of a family and individuals. Okay, so let's look at some problems here. First of all, I think to understand that these things that I'm going to show you are problems. We have to, there's a given there. And secondly, there are some things that we need to do to correct them. And then I will try to indicate what kinds of things need to be done to correct this. Some of them are simple editing problems. Many people, when they hear about this, it comes very close to your mother telling you to go clean up your room. Sometimes that's a little vague. It depends on the mother, it depends on the room, what is actually needed. Well, that's exactly the same problem here. We're telling people, in a sense, to go clean up the trees, but we're not. But everybody has a lot of different situations. So I'm going to give multiple examples of what we're talking about and what needs to be done in each case. So let's look at the first one here. This is a name, and they have Judy or Judah, Barber or Baber, And the problem here is a little bit complex. First of all, in many of the issues that we're talking about and with problems, is we need to understand that these are online family trees, that we're dealing with a program that has been created by some developers, in this case, FamilySearch. And and the program is an analog of, it's an online virtual representation of an analog device, which previously was used by genealogists. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is paper forms. And so in a paper form, it was not important that I put in a name like this given name here, first name or given name, Judy or Judah, and then Baber as a surname. In a program on the computer, and now as it published on the internet, and particularly FamilySearch FamilyTree, there is a place for a given name or and a surname, or the name that's common with the family or in the culture, depending on the culture involved. In this case, it's the problem here is having two given names. That may be the case. There may be records which have recorded this person both as Judy or Judah, and the problem is that how do we tell that? Well, unfortunately now, the question is going to have to be answered by another question. And that question is, what is the form of the name in the earliest record that is available for this person? And I'm going to repeat that a couple of times as we go along. And that is the answer. So it's either Judy or Judah. One of the two shows up on the earliest record. That's the one that we're asking for here in making a record. Where does the other name go? We record that name with perhaps the place it was found, if that is significant. And that one comes in as an alternative name. So the problem here for the computer is that when it goes to look for a person named Baber, and you find, and it looks for someone named Judy or Judah, never in the world is the computer program going to find a given names recorded as Judy or Judah in any record that we ever looked at. So putting that name in there simply prohibits or prevents the computer from searching for this individual. So if you have this kind of record, what you do is you are basically checking out of all of the resources of the computer program you're using, in this case, the family tree, that might help you in finding this individual or further information about this individual. Okay, the next one here is Lucia, and with a probably a shortened version of the name Lucy, maybe a nickname, we could call that a nickname, Bagby. Once again, the same problem that was in the first instance, and that is that this extra name in there is not the name of the person that appears on the oldest or earliest available record for this individual. If her name was Lucia Bagby, that's the way it should read, and Lucy should be put in as an alternative or nickname for that person, recorded someplace else in the family tree program. In the FamilySearch FamilyTree program, there is a specific place for other information. The other information then and one of the categories is alternative names. And you can put in this and record this kind of Lucy nickname. Granted, when you go to search for this person, you may be looking for someone named Lucy Bagby, or you may be looking for someone named Lucia Bagby, or it could be Lucille, or there could be a lot of other variations on these particular names. So it's just possible that that happened. Okay, so here's another name, Sarah Unknown. I really, in all my years of research, have found very, very, very few people with the actual surname unknown. Putting a surname in there, any surname that is not reflected in a record, is simply not telling the computer that you know who this person is, but it's also making it impossible for anyone else to do research on this using the information that's there in the computer. Obviously, that needs to be Sarah blank. So I was saying about Sarah unknown. There is not a program out there that I'm aware of that would say that this was a standard way of representing an unknown surname. It's best to leave it blank. And I was going to say that there are some programs that allow a married name to be added to a person, to a female person in our culture and society. But I even think that is a bad procedure. I'm not in favor of that personally. I think that we ought to be able to preserve those maiden names, and if they're unknown, they should be left blank. Then we know they're not there. The reason why, and there's a good research reason why I am opposed to using a married name as the surname of a person, and that is because a person may actually have married, say, in our society, it's possible that a male could have actually married a female who had the same surname. And so that is confusing to know whether or not the female had the same name as the male, or whether or not that name is the married name for that individual. Okay, so here we go. Benjamin Maple, Roman numeral 2. Now the issue here is this is really common, by the way, especially if there are a whole series of people in a pedigree who have the same name. There seems to be a tendency, at least in Western European society, to only add Roman numerals to male people in the pedigree. If all the women in the pedigree have the same name, there doesn't seem to show up as Sarah Jones, Roman numeral 2 or 3 or whatever. But with males, it does. I suggest they're just inappropriate. It doesn't really matter anymore. The computer can keep it straight. And we're going to Benjamin Maple, Roman numeral 2. And Roman numeral 2, I'm ambivalent on that. Some programs allow it, but in my opinion, it's inappropriate. It's no longer needed to keep track. The computer keep adequate track of the difference between Benjamin Maple, born in 1830, and the one born in 1850, and the one born in 1870. I don't think we need Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3 to differentiate these people. It may be good for people to put that in for their own purposes, but it doesn't really need to be recorded. And additionally, there is no way in the world anybody did a record where where you would go out and look for Benjamin Maple, Roman numeral 2. That would be very unusual. Now, when would be the exception? The exception would be is if that person's name was actually Benjamin Maple, Roman numeral 2. And it was part of his original given name at the time in the earliest record that we found, and then that would be something I would make a note of in the work. Jane Holbrook here. This one's fairly simple. The name's fine. The fact that it's in capital letters is a holdover from paper genealogy. At one point in time, the surnames were by standard all caps. I think this is also misleading because there are some mixtures of capital letters and lowercase letters in in names like McDonald or McPherson or whatever that need to be reflected, and having everything in caps will sometimes make it difficult to understand whether or not those names are valid or not valid. Okay, so we have some more exceptions, and here's the ultimate one. This is the one that is my favorite. This is Mary, born about 1745 in England. And if you would like an interesting way to explain how ridiculous this is to put into a family tree, just go into a program like findmypast.com and search for Mary and put in the date of about 1745 and search in England, and you will find there will probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple of million people named Mary in England at that time. And so this is just worse than not, in my sense. It may or may not be correct. In other words, the person was either born in England or they weren't born in England. And they were, if they're in England and you don't know the birth date, then there's ways of showing that it's estimated about as possible. But another problem that shows up here is the 2 commas that are in this entry before England. Those commas come from the old program used by lots of different people, personal ancestral file, and that was copied over from paper genealogy, where if you were going to put in the country, you had to put in a comma and a comma to show that you left out the city and the county. In other words, here, what we're talking about is an entry that is in no way standard. As a matter of fact, just from the standpoint of FamilySearch FamilyTree, the ABT was wrong also, because the standard form for this, for saying about, would be lowercase ABOUT 1745. So this obviously needs to be tuned up or corrected. And if you look down below, the key here is that there are no sources, there are no memories. There's one discussion, which you may want to look at, but without a source, how do they know this person's name was Mary? And how do they know when she was born and if she was born in England? So these are the kinds of questions you ask as you work your way through these problems. Now, important thing to understand is there are instructions and standards. So here on FamilySearch.org, there is a document in the help menu which says entering names correctly in the family tree, and it has specific information on capitalization, maiden and married names, legal name changes, and all of these other issues that come up when we talk about names. So if you go into the upper right-hand corner of the Family Search screen, you'll see it where it says help, and then go to the help center and go to the family tree section and type in entering names correctly, and you will find this document that will explain exactly how, what the standards are for that. And so there are standards for each of the programs. Sometimes they're not necessarily written down like this, put forth, but they're going to be able to see when you enter a name, sometimes the program itself will start giving you suggestions about whether it's correct or not, whether the entry is acceptable. So the important thing here is we're trying to communicate, and at the very basic level, we're communicating with a computer program. And we're hoping that the people on the other side of that computer program, the people who are going to look at the family tree, understand what we're saying. And it helps, and a standard way of entering information helps, even if you don't know the standard, it helps to, if you're looking at it and you don't know what the standard is, you will notice the fact that the entries are consistent. If you're the person putting the information in, of course you have to know what the standard is, or you won't have a consistent entry. Okay, so here's where you go. So go to the Help Center and do a search for entering names, and that will give you that. So the ultimate question that you ask yourself is, what will a computer program use to search for the name? So whatever you've put in there, if it isn't something that you think would be part of what would be recorded in a historical record, then it probably doesn't have any place. It should be left out or put into notes or into alternative other information or someplace else in the program where it won't prevent the computer, the search engine ultimately for the program, or the search engine for ultimately online for programs like Google, from finding the information. And once again, to make sure that you enter the names as it appears in the earliest available source. And this is an important point also, even if that source is a grave marker. So when we say the earliest available source, if the only thing you have is a grave marker, it's whatever the grave marker's name is, how it's recorded on the grave marker. That's the earliest name. Now it might come up that particular name is wrong or inaccurate as you find other sources, but what we're going with is the earliest source that we have available. Okay, that's the first stage. Now we're going to do a first stage tune-up. Those were the examples, bad examples. Now we're going to talk about tuning it up. So what we do for a first stage tune-up is to go through and check all the names and make corrections where necessary. So that's what we're starting out to do. We're going to look at those names and we're going to say, is this accurately reflect the way that the record, the earliest record, has the name recorded. Now, the case of Mary in 1745. It is a good idea if the record says the earliest record we have and the only record we have is, for example, a marriage record, and the only name we have for the married person is Mary, that should be recorded. The issue there is how much more information is actually in the record. If it were a marriage record, and say that marriage record was in 1765, then acceptable genealogical guessing privileges, or whatever you want to call them, estimating names that's been accepted by genealogists for years, is that you could estimate a birth depending from, say, 15 to 20 years before that for a marriage that was in 1745 in England. But be careful not to record information that is not either well estimated from the available sources, or is if a source is entirely missing, as is the case of my example, then there's no basically, where did you get the name? Why is the name there? How do we know the name is Mary? And from a strict standpoint, it should be kept in the notes and not incorporated, as long as there has to be some reason basically why someone put the name Mary in there, and that's why it's kind of difficult to understand why there's no source here. Okay. If there are no sources, then how do you know if the name's correct? That's the ultimate question, and the answer is you don't. And so you either leave it out or you come up with a source that shows that it's correct. I suppose if you really were being honest, you could say I made it up, but that is probably happens enough that we don't need to know about it. Okay, so now we're moving on to date problems. We've hashed a little bit here, hashed over some names, but now we're going to work with date problems. Here's some date problems, and I'm going to explain how these should be fixed. The basic idea here, and I'll reinforce that in just a moment, is that each of the programs has a standard way of entering dates. Unfortunately, across the board among all the genealogical programs out there online and on desktop programs, there is no overwhelming standard. In other words, it's not there's not just one way that dates are recorded. Some programs would allow 2 Sep 1786. FamilySearch, on the other hand, is the standard for FamilySearch FamilyTree is the date with the month spelled out and the full number of digits for the year, in this case 1786. Obviously, a number like 9/2/86 would be totally ambiguous. It could be 1786, 1886, 1986. We're not up quite to 2086 yet, but at some point in time, it'll become even more ambiguous. It could be 1586. So we really have to know. And the problem with having 9/2 or 2/9 is just what I just said. Both of those are ambiguous. Is it February 9th or is it September 2nd? And so what we've focused on here in FamilySearch is putting out the whole name. The other problem that we find is that we need to have the standard for doing dates the same regardless of the language being used. And abbreviations are not all the same in all the languages, and so there may be some confusion. And it's important to just spell the month out, and then we don't have to worry about it. It may be, in some cases, in alternative calendars, in Chinese calendars, in Israeli calendars, things like that, the months have different names. And we need to know what they are regardless of where they are. Here's another one, deceased. And no source and no sources and nothing. Obviously, a person is deceased if they lived in the 1800s or 1700s or whatever. So that's there's a date problem here, and it's missing. What's the problem? The date's missing. We need to be able to come up with some kind of a date. We do have a rule. One of the general rules of genealogy is just because you can't find a death certificate doesn't mean the person's still alive. That's one of the major basic rules of genealogy. In this case, deceased is proper, but it's helpful to understand that this is a part of the tune-up process, is going out and seeing if there are any records that show this information, or at least give us a reason to put in an about date that might give us some more information. Here's one, Est 17E1 of Ulverston, England. Again, we see a couple of problems here, but we haven't gotten to places yet, so I won't comment on that. Est 1781. The only thing I would say about this one is that it may or may not be standard regarding which, depending on the program, there may be a different word estimated or may be abbreviated as est. But the important thing here is to attach some kind of information as to why the date is estimated and where the estimation came from. Here again, you'll see there's 0 sources. Which means in FamilySearch, no one has told us why they're estimating this date at 1781 or where that came from. If they're off 10 years or 15 or 20 years, how many other people with the same name may be there? How many people could you be out? Could you be talking about generation changes here? Are we estimating 1781 and that puts him as this generation, and if we estimated as 1761, would that put him in a different generation? People with the same name. Here's an interesting problem too, and this is a problem that has to do with doing the math and looking at the information that's there from the dates. And the date problems can, and this one is death year before the marriage. Well, I mean, I don't have any comments on that. There's a cartoon production about marrying a dead lady. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about here in genealogy. This is obviously a problem that needs to be addressed and changed and worked on. And again, if we go up to the help menu in FamilySearch and in the other instructions and information that may be available from the other programs out there, on the online programs like Ancestor and Find My Past, and the desktop programs like Roots Magic and Ancestral Quest and some of the other programs that are out there, FamilyTree Maker and whatever. These programs all have standardized ways of allowing you to enter dates. And some of the programs I'm aware of allow you to put it in different ways. So there are, but in FamilySearch, there are instructions and standards because we are in a collaborative mode, and we're allowing people to make changes and put in new information and change existing information. And it's important to have the standards so that that information is consistent and we know what we're talking about. It's like trying to stay in the same language, trying to continue to communicate in that exactly same language. So for example, if I were talking right as I am now and decided to switch into Spanish, which I could do, some of you may not understand anything I had to say. And then if I switch back into English, all the Spanish speakers might be lost. What we're trying to do when we're standardizing names and dates, and particularly places, is get us all on the same page, speaking the same language, so we know what we're talking about, and we can rely on the information that's being provided to us in the family tree. So look in the Help Center again for entering dates, and you'll come up with entering standardized dates and places in FamilySearch. And once again, think about what will the computer program use to search for the date. Here's the proper date format, which is day, month spelled out, and year. So this is how it should be looking, 22 April 1836. There are some changes going back if we understand, you may have heard of calendar changes between the Julian and the Gregorian calendar. There are standards in the standardized date formats for reporting dates within the time periods when there was there were some changes from the different calendars, and those are also part of the process of regularizing and standardizing all of this information. Okay, so now what are we going to do? Here's my caution here: estimate, but don't make up. In other words, just because it's blank doesn't mean you're compelled to fill the blank with something. If you don't know, leave it blank, and then we'll have a chance of somebody else to come along and see if they can fill that in. And also, as I mentioned a moment ago, check the standard date format for the program you're using. It may be different than the one that I've specified here. I know, for example, that Ancestry does accept, in fact, prefers the shortened name versions for the months. So the abbreviations for months are acceptable in Ancestry. Okay, now we're up to the second stage tune-up. Better get moving here. Go through and check all the dates and make the corrections where necessary. That's where you do it your second stage, and do the math. Make sure everyone's not born before their mother was born or born after everybody died, and get the dates and things correct. Unfortunately, if you find a problem like this, you may spend a great deal of time, because that may be like the tip of a huge line of dominoes that when you hit the first thing, everything starts to collapse and the whole entries get to be redone, and you spend a lot of time on it. But that's kind of the nature of what we're involved with here in genealogy. Okay, place names. Let's move along here. Here's a place name missing. Death place is missing. Burial place is listed. So that's a possible thing. Anytime there's a missing piece of information, it might be a good idea to go out and look for it. It may turn out that you have the rest of the information about this individual wrong. This one is interesting because it's also a date issue with this entry. We have a burial date of 25 March of 1807 and a death date, which is inferred here, of 1807 with 0 sources on both. So we're really kind of floating around out here. This one is a death date. You have a christening date, which is not standard for FamilySearch. You also have a place name that is interesting because it has Thornbury, comma, and no spaces all the way through. You would think this would be a simple task. Unfortunately, computers look at spaces just as they do to characters. The space is just as important as his character. And if you look for Thornbury, comma, Gloucester, England, they're going to look for that whole thing with commas because you've made it all one word. And that isn't going to work. So unless, someone really bright down there has figured out that the program, when it searches, automatically puts in spaces and ignores commas or whatever. So don't count on that, though. And you might want to do it correct. And looking down below, we see the comma, comma, Georgia again. Here's the problem with this. Georgia what? He was christened in England and he died in Georgia. And the question here is, did he die in someplace in Eastern Europe or did he die in America? Okay, well, that may be a ridiculous question. You may think, well, what never happened? It came to America, obviously, and the answer is no. It may have gone the other way. So there's a lot of interesting levels of things that you can look at when you get here, and we need to be more specific. It would be proper to say Georgia, comma, in 1858, it would be United States. If it was an ancestry program, it would, on the family tree, it would be United States. On Ancestry, it would be USA. And there's this going back and forth between Ancestry and FamilySearch on whether we use United States or USA. Both are acceptable, and some of the programs have compromised by accepting both. I know, for example, Roots Magic will accept either. And you can make change back and forth between the two if you'd like, and it will automatically change them all. Okay, so here's another one, of Oldston, comma, comma, England. Originally, this was, the of thing was originated because you would find a record later on in a person's life, and he lived in Oldston, England. And so because you didn't have a birth record, you would put in of Oldston, which let people know that he lived there but may not have even been born there. So the question is, why are you putting it in the birth at all? You can record it under was resident of Oldston in the other information. You could put it in if they have a death record, you could put it in the death record if it was in Oldston, England. And again, you have comma, comma. Now, if you know that the place was Oldston and you know that it was in England, it's a very simple procedure to go look this up, and you can fill in which county it was in. It was in 1781. And so why are the commas there? It means you just haven't cleaned up this entry. You haven't done all your work. What if you find out there's 5 different Oldston's in England? Well, okay, then you've got a problem. See, now you may have the whole wrong thing. You may have picked up the wrong person altogether. So this is not a trivial thing that I'm talking about in doing these. Now we have another one here, Ardrosson, Ire, period, Scott, period. Okay, anybody got a guess where that is? Yes, of course, we all know where it is. It was Ardrosson, Ireland, Scotland. Well, yeah, do we? Well, maybe. But where did this come from? This came from again, we're looking at an entry that has not been changed since it was recorded on a paper family group sheet where you had a little squishy place to put the place and you had to abbreviate everything. And this has been just copied directly into a computer program, and now it's showing up in 2019 on my computer, and I'm going to fix it because I can look up Ardrossan and find out where it is in Scotland and fix the name. And that way we're not looking for periods and all sorts of things that are extra here. I really, really, really avoid periods. Why? Have you ever heard of .com? You know, like FamilySearch.org, the dot there, that's a period. The dots are characters with important programming issues on computers. I would never use periods in these because the periods could be interpreted as a different thing by a computer program. So be careful with periods. Okay, once again, there is a place called Entering Standardized Dates and Places in FamilySearch under the Help menu. Do a general search. By the way, if you can't find it on FamilySearch because of whatever reason, do a Google search for it. You'll find it because everything on FamilySearch is searchable by Google. And you may find it much more quickly if you just do a search on Google for all this stuff. So look for entering places. If I were searching on Google, I'd put FamilySearch.org and then without hitting the enter key or whatever, so I didn't go to FamilySearch.org, I would then type entering places and it would probably pull up this page. What will the computer program use to search for the place? That's the keyword question you keep asking. If what we have in there is garbage, it will never find the place and it will never find the person and will never find you any records for that person. Okay, so understanding that genealogically valuable records are found associated with the place where the events occurred in an ancestor's life. This is a rule. This is a basic understanding rule of how genealogy functions. We need to know the places, and the places are more important than anything else. If we don't know the place, we're not going to find the person because we've got too many people with the number of people with the same names is overwhelmingly large. Just within the last week, I ran across an obituary for someone with my complete name. And if I ever thought my name was unique, I long lost that. My first experience was driving into Arlington National Cemetery, and the first thing we saw was a great big headstone, grave marker there with the name James Jenner on it. So that was, I remember that because I went, oh, I didn't know I was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Anyway, so a place should be recorded as it was designated at the time of the event. So this is the second part of it. Records are found at or near the place where, associated with the place where the events occurred. And then the places should be recorded as they were designated at the time of an event. We could go on to that for a whole hour, but we're just going to have to skip on. Here's some standardized place names. St. John's, Apache County, Arizona, United States. That's a FamilySearch standardized place name. Beaver, Utah Territory, United States. That's another standardized name. Hopkinton Kings, Rhode Island, British colonial America. That one's got some controversy. There was never a place called British colonial America. And so that has become a rather pervasive standard, but it isn't accepted by everybody. Not everybody's happy with that. We've got to come up with something better. I don't know that we have yet. So there's lots of discussion about that one. Ramsey, Huntingdonshire, England, United Kingdom. That one can't possibly be wrong. Understanding that United Kingdom has the term United Kingdom applies to a certain time period in British history. And so there's a little bit of discussion back and forth about whether that's appropriate depending on the time frame that we have to work with. Third stage tune-up, go through and check all the places and make the corrections where necessary. Look each place up on a mapping program such as Google Maps. Absolutely do this. See if they are, see where they are. Look at them. Find out where these places are. Find out if you have all of the jurisdictions recorded properly, county, state, provinces, districts, whatever it is that you're dealing with, that all of those are adequately represented by the name. Oh, there's something I should have put in there, and that is names of places go from the smallest geographical area to the largest. So we start with tiny towns, farms, or whatever it is, and we move our way up till we get to nations. Okay, so that's how it works. And check the names. By the way, Wikipedia is a tremendously valuable resource for looking up names of places. I seldom find even the most obscure sounding place that doesn't already have a page in Wikipedia talking about it. So it's a great resource for geographical information. Okay, now we're moving on to sources. This is a little bit simpler. And most of the examples here are going to be of things that are not sources. And that's really what we're trying to clean up. We really don't need them in the family tree. We don't need to know that it's on the Millennial file. The Millennium file was an Ancestry file that's now been discontinued, and it is not a source. It was simply another family tree program. That was just all derived of what other people had submitted to Ancestry. So that wasn't worth much. Legacy NFS source, Margaret. And this is the ancestral file. Once again, this is the same as the Millennial file. This is a user-submitted compilation of documents that were submitted over about almost 100 years. And they're not sourced necessarily, and this is not a source. By definition, is not a source. It was not something that records that person's name. Going to the ancestral file is like going to someone else's family tree and copying out the information without even looking to see if there's a source. So this is not a source. And here's a whole bunch of them. Legacy NSF sources. NSF is newfamilysearch.org. It was the program that was discontinued when the family tree was introduced. And it is where all of this stuff came from, accumulated, and was dumped into the family tree program. So that's where that is. And they say legacy NF, they didn't want to lose anything. The question is, you really need to go click on each of those and see if there's actually any source information in there, or if it's just another entry from the New Family Search. Ultimately, this stuff originates clear back into what was the PAF organization, PAF program. People were adding in records into PAF. There was not this emphasis on making sure that the information was correctly attributed to a source. And so it kind of went, we kind of got all this information out of that. And this one's the ultimate one right here. This source says they got it out of the family tree. So I don't even figure out how you could do this. I mean, it's basically saying that there's some other entry in the family tree that you copied this from. I don't know. Anyway, this is really strange. Hmm? Yeah. Oh, okay. So there's a question came in about where they came from. Originally, the New Family Search program simply copied everything that had been entered previously, verbatim, without any kind of, I mean, there's some idea out there, some people have the idea that Family Search or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or somebody went through and looked at this stuff. They never did. They just dumped it in. Ancestry family trees, same thing here. This is just, and this doesn't even tell where in the Ancestry family trees we got it. So this is not a source at all. So these are kinds of things that should be looked at. And here, once again, on the instructions and standards, there are tips for sources in the family tree. And basically, it asks us to tell where you got the information and describe it in enough detail that someone else could go find that piece of information. And here's my rule. When attaching a source to an ancestor's record, provide enough context for other users to trust and know where to find it. If possible, include a full web address. This is sort of a generalized instruction. The source should tell everyone where you found the information. Here's an example of a helpful source. This is a source, I'm not going to read all that, for a 1910 census record from St. Joseph, Navajo County, Arizona. And that's the complete record of how to find that particular sheet of paper in the federal census for 1910. The fourth stage tune-up then is to go through and check all the sources and make the corrections where necessary and look up each of the sources online. It's a good idea to look at them. It just might help you. One thing that I find continually is that the information that's right there in the sources that are listed has not been transferred to the entry. So there may be a death date there in the sources that hasn't been put into the information that's shown in the entries above. This may seem slow, like a difficult thing, but genealogy isn't a race. We're not here to try to do things as fast as possible. We're simply here to get the work done as completely and correctly as possible. Okay, so here's going on to memories. Now, memories aren't always available in other programs, but with FamilySearch, we have memories. Most of the other big programs allow you to attach all sorts of documents and things. FamilySearch has that. One of the most common ones on FamilySearch is that here we have duplicate photos. One's in black and white, one's in an original brown tone. One's missing the title and one has a title. So there's a little bit of cleanup here that needs to be done. This one is an unknown photo. We don't have any idea who this person is. You may not even have any way of finding out who the person is, but at least you should be aware that there are people out there that are unidentified. This is a document that's been put into the memory section of FamilySearch. It needs to be tagged. It needs to be associated with the people named in the document, with all the people named in the document. And that's another thing that needs to be done to help tune up the FamilySearch. And there is, once again, this one's very thorough, and it's the memory policy and instructions. And there are instructions, and it's helpful to read through them and figure out what it is we're trying to do with memories on FamilySearch. Memories help. They're really a big help, and more of the things that I find from my standpoint that are the most help. I love the pictures. That's wonderful. I love the stories. That's great. I also wish they had more copies of all the documents that they've been able to find. But sometimes those documents are no longer available for any place else. Fifth stage tune-up is add your own memories. And where are all the instructions to all this? The answer is, well, I've been referring you to the Help Center, but if you want the overall Help Center, the place where you can go to get all of the information about what I've talked about today, everything in instructions on memories and places and dates and all of that is in the Family History Guide. That's the Family History Guide. It's thefhguide.com. This is a comprehensive, structured website for teaching, helping, supporting, and learning about family history. Working through this program will help you become a competent family historian and a competent genealogist. What I've been saying for a long time is if you actually work through this program, you'd know more than probably 90% of the people out there trying to do family history. So this is a fabulous resource, free, online. It's the official FamilySearch training partner. It is not associated directly with FamilySearch. And for purposes of disclosure, of course, you have to understand that I am on the board of directors of the corporation, the Family History Guide Association, which is the nonprofit fundraising organization for the Family History Guide. And that tells us we're through. Thanks for watching. Any questions?
All right, it looks like we have a couple of questions. 1 second while I pull those up. You're good.
Oh, okay, now I'm on here. Question says, my father was W.T. Hansen. How do you suggest the name be recorded? He was a junior and then he personally changed it to Roman numeral 2. All of those, record them all. As far as the entry, the main entry in FamilySearch, if you do not know what the W and the T stand for, or if they were just initials, I do have ancestors who have that, then that's what you record. But I would make some notes, make sure that you understand it, and they have a suffix location for junior. I would record the earliest one if he was originally a junior, and then if he changed it to Roman numeral 2, I would also again make a note. There's plenty of places to make notes in the other information section of FamilySearch that helps people explain these kinds of situations. And I wouldn't just put in a Roman numeral 2, I would put in an explanation that says on such and such a date or after such and such a date, he began using this as part of his name and on and so forth, if that's the way it occurred. So that way people have a way of knowing when they've looked for someone that they've found that person. What about foreign places and American places? Standard dates for foreign places? Yes, every place in the world has a standard name. The interesting thing about that is the challenge of coming up with the correct places for the Central Europe, for example. Very common, people will say they were born in Germany. Until around 1880, there was no such place as Germany. So that's the kind of the situations we run into in Europe. Very, very important that we come up with the exact place. This is doubly important in Scandinavian countries because there was such a limited pool of surnames and given names. And so we go down to the house level and to the farm level in order to make sure we have the right people. Some of my next questions, some of my Scandinavian ancestors have ordinances under their farm names. That's fine. Maybe that's one way to do it. I know that they've added the farm name onto Scandinavian names on occasion, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It may be helpful. Should I delete them? Absolutely not. Do not delete things. Leave them there. If they're on your ancestors, the answer is I wouldn't delete them again. I might move them down to other information, but I certainly wouldn't delete the information. Should we identify people in a photo if they're living? If you tag anyone in the photo at all, the way FamilySearch Memories works, then the photo is visible and searchable on Google, actually. And so tagging it a photo makes everyone visible. If they are living, I would suggest not. I don't think it's a good idea to tag. I don't think you can tag living people with the program, but I don't think that would be a good idea to put that on there. So I would just leave those people off until they all die. What about using 3 question marks? Unless you can find a record, a historical record that records that person's name with 3 question marks, I would not use that. The idea here is to not put in information that is not part of a historical record. So if the person's name is John and that's all you have, that's all you can record. And leave it blank. Don't worry about putting in unknown. It's obvious if it's missing, it's not known. So there's no reason to put in question marks or blanks. And if someone fills in a name that isn't inappropriate, then that's the same as any other inappropriate change, and we can go in there and modify and change that back. Yes, on Sarah unknown, you would just put Sarah with nothing. Yes. Oh, the delete was referring to the NFS source. Do we delete these NFS sources? I look at them, and the question I have is it a source or not a source? In other words, if it gives us information about where to find the historical records that produce the information in the entry, then the answer would be yes, it is a source. If it simply says comma, comma, or if it says unknown or just anything like that, which I find all the time in these NFS sources, I would suggest that they be deleted because they're just a lot of noise that doesn't mean anything. Do we standardize to Italian or American placements? I would. Okay, so this was a question that started out with FamilySearch very beginning, but is only now becoming, getting some traction. The last couple of years, we've gotten a little traction. And the answer is we're going to start recording these place names in the language that they are. We're going to actually start doing that. And so this is kind of a transition right now, and I think it's kind of a major issue. But so if I'm going to record it the way it is in not the anglicized names of all these places. So whatever it's called in that country is what we're going to use as the name. Any other questions? Thanks. Glad you could all be here today. Remember these, sorry for the little bit of technical difficulties we had. These webinars are being uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel and should be available there for everyone to view. Oh, by the way, if the YouTube doesn't work in the building, in the church building where you attend your meetings, then we also have links to the videos on the BYU channel. So go to the BYU Family History Library website and find the same video, and you'll be probably be able to view it in the building.
It looks like we also have another question. Julia asks, what do we do about characters specific to that language? Referring to recording places in the native language.
Maybe I'm not understanding. You mean the character set, or what are you referring to? Ask her.
Like the umlaut.
Oh yeah, all of that. The alternate character sets are available as part of the computer. If you're using Windows or you're using Apple OS, it doesn't matter. All of those programs have full character sets for all the different languages. And the answer that I would give is yes. And the reason I give that is because when you're searching for records, that's the way they're going to appear. We want to have it possible for the computers to do the search. And so, yes, it should include all the diacritics, umlauts and tildes and all of that stuff that are used in the languages. And I try to use them all as much as that's possible. Yeah, English spellings should use the spelling in the place where it is. That should be the rule. And if people keep changing it back to the English, just keep changing it back to whatever it was in whatever country it is.
All right, that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you so much for your participation, everyone. Next webinar will be on Wednesday, the 13th of February. That'll be with Catherine Grant, and we'll be talking about collaboration in the family tree. I guess that's sort of a follow-up to this webinar, because Catherine will be talking about how we can work better together with those that are on the FamilySearch program, because we're all working on the same program. So just to reiterate that again, that'll be on Wednesday the 13th at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. Following that webinar, the next day on Thursday at 3 p.m., we will be having a webinar with Michael Hansen, and he'll be giving a presentation on what to do with old genealogical materials, and talking about where you can donate those, if you can give them to FamilySearch, things like that. So you won't want to miss that. That'll be a really great webinar. A recording of this webinar and all of our other webinar recordings is available on our YouTube page as well as our website. And just like James was saying, we do have those videos on our website in a different format than YouTube. So if you can't access YouTube, if you have problems with that, we do have an alternate viewing platform for those videos. All right, thank you so much. If you have any concerns or questions, you're welcome to email at fhl_webinars@byu.edu. And we hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.